What's up guys, and welcome back to the Bonsai-En YouTube channel. I'm Josh, and today we're going to be doing some deadwood maintenance on this lavender star bonsai, so stick around. Alright, so what we've got here is a gruya or a lavender star bonsai. Now this particular tree here I actually acquired close to a year ago during our last winter season, and over the last year the first thing that I wanted to do with this tree is actually get it out of the pot that it was in. It was in a larger round pot, so I'm a bit of a stickler for having trees in pots that are kind of the right size for the tree. Some people like pots that are a little oversized, but I feel like a pot that this size is kind of perfect for this tree. So I kind of downscaled the pot a little bit, but I was also looking for a tree to put into this pot. So this pot here is a handmade pot from Bad Swan Ceramics, and Brendan does absolutely fantastic work, so I do recommend going and checking him out. So I had this pot for quite a while. I had bought it from him just because I liked, the colouring of it and the shape and the fighting fish on the front. So I'd always been searching for a tree that was going to go into this pot, and I knew that the tree that was going to go into this pot needed to be something that could be, flowering and, have really nice lines in it. And when I seen the trunk on this tree, I was like, that's perfect. And knowing the fact that these particular species actually flower for most of the year made it even more perfect. So we got it into the Bad Swan Ceramics pot. That was the first thing I did because, as I said, I actually acquired this mid-winter last year, and coming up to the end of that winter season, it was just perfect timing. These are a deciduous tree, so end of winter there, once we got the bud swell, got it over into this pot. And then throughout that growing season, I just let it recover. As we moved into autumn, which we're in now, this tree had had so many flushes of growth throughout the spring and summer season. I knew it was just super healthy, and it had recovered so well from the repot that I actually come through and I gave it a major cutback. Now I've only just given it this cutback. That's why it's probably looking a little bit rough as it sits, because this tree was so full that you couldn't even see the front of this. It had this big canopy out here. You couldn't see any of the interior growth. It was just basically a big shrub. So I probably removed 60% of the branches off this tree, come through and wired up a basic structure as to what I felt the tree suited. You can see that we've kind of got it more going in this direction. It's compacted on this side. That gives us that harmonious balance in our design. So that's what we've done to the tree so far. Now today's video, what I want to show you is just a bit of deadwood maintenance. As you can see, we've got this deadwood up the front here. Now I've got a feeling that this deadwood may have actually been naturally done by ants, but it may have also been carved. I'm not sure. I would have to check with the original artist on that. But I actually have had trees where ants have gotten into the trunk and your thumb's gone through the trunk, and this is the kind of deadwood that they leave. It's actually really cool. But what we're going to do today is go through and clean this up because it's really quite dirty at the moment. We need to scrub it back. We need to apply some more lime sulphur to it. So I'll show you the tools that we use for that, the techniques that we use, and the lime sulphur application. So without any further ado, let's jump into it. Alright, so the first tool that we're going to use is our most common tool, and this is our brass wire brush. Now this brush is quite abrasive, and this is going to do the bulk of cleaning the deadwood. Now you do want to be careful when using this, because if there's loose parts of the deadwood or anything that you don't want to come off, you can accidentally take it off with this. So just check your deadwood first, but we'll have a look at that once we start using this on the tree. But this is just our J-type brass wire bonsai brush. Pretty common when it comes to bonsai deadwood cleaning. You'll see these everywhere. They do come in a nylon one too, but that's to clean your branches and anything with bark on it. If you were to use this brush on bark itself, you would almost certainly take that bark off the tree. So don't ever use this brush to clean any kind of bark on your bonsai trees. Alright, so the next thing that we'll be using on this tree is our fine detail deadwood brush. Now once again we have steel bristles on this, so it's, pretty aggressive, but with this one you can see how thin it is and it can get into the very tight spaces that we'll have, and you'll see that when we use it on the tree what I mean. It does also have a flat end as well as the tapered end that you just seen before. Now something that's not always as common, but we've got our weed pulling tweezers just here. Now these are not my good ones, but these are the ones that I use for jobs, like I said, like pulling weeds. But also too, sometimes in our deadwood, if we have very deep fissures in the deadwood, you'll get like leaves and dirt and stuff that get stuck down there. So these downturned tweezers are really handy just for getting in there and getting that stuff out. Now the next thing that we've got here is our paint brushes, so that we can apply our lime sulphur to the tree. So you can see we've got a couple of different sizes here. Obviously the bigger one will do, the mass in the middle, so the most area. And then as you start getting to the outside where you need to be a little bit more fine and get a little bit more detail, then you can start moving down into the smaller brushes. And last but not least, we have our lime sulphur solution. So you can get them in bottles like this. These are the ones that we sell at Bonsai-En, but this is what we're going to be applying to the tree to give it that bone white colour. Now, this lime sulphur is also very handy for things like spider mite, and also for winter spraying or winter overspraying, so that you can avoid problems coming into the springtime in terms of having pests and disease on your trees. So it's always good to have a bottle of this lime sulphur handy, whether you're doing deadwood work or whether you're doing winter oversprays or whether you're trying to treat things like spider mite. Alright, so I've got you in nice and close to the tree now. So the first thing that we're going to do is just inspect our deadwood and just see if there's any areas of this that are starting to come loose, because that can happen over time as the deadwood starts to age and weather. We start to get bits of it that are loosening up, and if we start aggressively coming in and cleaning with this, we can actually knock those bits of deadwood off. So it's just good to come along and feel around. We can feel that that's still pretty quite solid. And you don't have to be super rough with it, because if you are super rough then you're probably going to just break it off yourself. But we can come along and we can feel all this is still pretty tight, all up in here. We can see this bit here is really loose. Okay, so we've got this piece here that we're going to have to be mindful of when we come through and clean. And just checking as we go up the tree whether there's any other loose bits. So at the moment this is the only loose bit here. So once we get to this section we may need to just use our fine detail brush, or we can go over it lightly with this and just see if we can get that off. But once we come to this we'll see how we're going to handle that. But at least we know now that that's there because we've come through and we've inspected. So we're just going to start down here, and what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and use this to get right in the middle here and do the bulk of my cleaning. But on the outside here I don't want to be using this brush, because like I said, anywhere where you've got bark you're likely to take it off with this or it's not going to look real good. So what we're going to do is just for now is we're going to try and gently use this in the middle and see if we can get the bulk of the dirt and the grime off. And a lot of it might not come off, but the lime sulphur will fix that up later, but we're just trying to get this back down to a nice clean surface for the lime sulphur application later. So let's just start by scrubbing. And we don't have to be super crazy about it. Just trying to get the areas that we can. A tip as well, when you're doing deadwood cleaning like this, don't just put your brush on here and push down on the tree. Always support your tree when you're trying to clean the deadwood. That way you're not disturbing the roots as much, and you reduce the risk of actually snapping something off the tree, because you're putting pressure down as you're trying to clean, but not supporting it. So always just have that supporting hand on there. That way you reduce that risk of breaking something. Alright, so now that we've gone up the middle, what we're going to do now is we're going to come through with our fine detail brush, and we're going to do along the edges here, close to the bark. We're going to do down in these fissures here, and then we're also going to do on this side close to the bark, and any other spot that we can't get into with our big tool. Now, a point to be made here about these types of tools for bonsai, as somebody who owns a bonsai shop, I always get pushback on things like selling, bonsai tools and things that are very specific, and people saying, well, instead of me buying a brass wire brush like this, I'll just use a toothbrush. Which is fine and dandy if you want to use a toothbrush. It's not going to be as aggressive as this. You're not going to be able to get the work done. But stuff like this, you can see, being really up close into these cracks like this and down into these fissures, you really need something that's specially made like this. And it's the same with bonsai scissors and things like that. The reason we have specially made bonsai scissors is because we have to get up into tight spaces and close areas with these scissors, and we don't want to wreck any of the work that we've previously done by trying to put, secateurs in there, or, I've seen people say that they use side cutters to trim their bonsai with. So I just wanted to point out that's why we have these specially made tools, is because 1, they make the job easier, 2, you can do the job better with them, and 3, kind of without them, you're not going to be able to do the job properly, which means you're not going to do as good of a job. I always say that if you've got trees that are worth working on properly, then it's worth having the tools to work on them properly. So, let's get this and start trying to clean up down in these tight areas. As I said, this is not going to perfectly clean up the deadwood, because a lot of this stuff that you're seeing on here actually seeps right down into it. So we're not going to do a perfect job, but what we do want to do is just clean the surface up as much as we can, so that as we apply the lime sulphur, it will soak into the wood properly, and it will actually adhere to the surface properly as well. So much like painting anything else, preparation is key to having, a longer lasting lime sulphur application on your tree. And you can see with this brush here how I can get nice and close to these edges here, where I couldn't with this big brush. If I try and do this with this big brush, I'm going to be just ripping up this bark along here. And, it takes a while for this bark to get thick and fissured like this, so we don't really want to be ripping that off. So that's where this guy coming in here is just super handy. We can get right down in there, and we can really control what we're doing. Once again, you can see this fissure here, how deep that brush can actually get down into it. Whereas if, once again, we were just trying to use this, we're never going to get these bristles down into there unless we're pushing really hard. Then we may actually break this off. So you're better off coming in with a brush like this and just getting that done. Just try and cover as much of that surface as you possibly can. Once again, just so that application of lime sulphur will work its way in better, and hopefully it'll last a bit longer for you. There is something to be said too about having some, darker spots down inside these fissures as well, because that kind of gives you depth to your deadwood. So we're just going to move up the tree here, and then I'll show you that bit that was loose. Okay, so I've got this bit here that was loose. So this is where we can now come in with this brush. We can support that piece and just try and clean it up a bit. We can clean up in front of it just here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and do the rest of this tree, and then when we come back we'll have a look at getting some of the stuff out of these deeper pockets with the tweezers, and then we'll do our lime sulphur application. Alright, so now that we've gone through and we've roughed up our surface and we've cleaned it up a little bit, now we're going to get our tweezers and we're going to get down into some of these deeper holes and just see if we can get some of the leaf litter and stuff out of here, because if it does sit in there for too long, it can potentially rot this out even further. So we do want to try and get in here and see if we can just get, you know, you can see that there. So if we can get a lot of this stuff out of there, then that'll be good for the tree in the future. So we're just going to poke around in here a little bit and see what we can get out. See, we've got some stuff there. So we'll get rid of that. Anything that's just loose and shouldn't be in there. There might actually be some, yeah, so some of that wood down in there is quite loose, and I know you can't see down in the hole, but it's a really difficult place to try and film with the camera. But I don't think I'm really, I can get some of it out. We've got some of the wood in there that's been decaying. So you can see that I'm getting that out there, and it's kind of falling apart as I'm pulling it out. But I tell you one thing is, when you're using tweezers, it'll show you how steady your hands really are. You can see that my hands, you know, they're shaking a little bit at the moment. But it only ever really happens when I'm using tweezers or trying to do something that's really fine and delicate. And you can see kind of how deep, you know, if I put the tweezers here, you can see how deep some of these holes actually are. So we want to try and get as most of that out of there as possible. Now once you do clean this up as much as you can either get something pneumatic to blow down in the hole, or you can just kind of blow it out like you're blowing out an old game cartridge. I'm sure there's plenty of us that are old enough to remember game cartridges and the treatment that we had to give them before we actually played the games. But at the moment we're somewhat just fishing in these holes and seeing what's in there and what we need to get out. But that looks like pretty much most of it for now. I'll give this a quick blowout and then we'll come back and we'll start applying our lime sulphur. I just wanted to pop in for a second and add something that I forgot to mention in the video. So when applying the lime sulphur to the tree, pretty much most of the people who do this will recommend that you wet the wood before you apply the lime sulphur. Now this isn't wrong by any means and you're absolutely welcome to do that. But I just want to point out that I've never actually wet the wood before putting on the lime sulphur, and this is not something that I invented or anything like that. It's just before I actually learnt about the whole putting lime sulphur thing on, I just tried it myself without learning about it, which was probably silly. But that's how I've just done it from the start, because I didn't realise that you had to wet the wood. But what I have actually found is if you wet the wood, like suggested, you get a much more white colour out of the lime sulphur. So it'll go white quicker and it will also go whiter. If you don't put the water on the wood first, it'll take a lot longer for the wood to actually turn white. So for me, it usually takes about 24 hours. And then what you end up with is more of a bone white colour rather than like a stark white colour. So you'll end up with a white colour that's got like a slight yellow hue through it, so you don't fully get rid of that yellow. But what I find is it actually looks more natural like that. It blends in a little bit more with the colour of the tree and it doesn't stand out quite so much. So when you mix it with the water and you get that really white colour, it usually takes a couple of months out in the weather to kind of calm that white colour down before it starts to blend in with the tree a little bit more. Whereas the way that I do it, it's like that straight away. So that's going to be up to you. Try it with, wetting the wood first, try it without wetting the wood, and just see what result you like. But nonetheless, you'll see my result at the end of this video, and you can make your choice of whether you want to wet the wood or whether you don't want to wet the wood. As I said, either way, it's not wrong, it's not right, it's just a preference of how the colouring is going to turn out. If you want really white deadwood, then wet the wood first. If you want it to be more bone white with a slight yellow hue to it, then don't wet the wood first. But let's get back to the video. Alright, so you can see that we've got our lime sulphur solution here. It's just straight, we don't actually mix it with anything. So we're going to get our paintbrush and we're going to dip it in here, and then we're going to start applying this to the tree. Alright, so when we apply it here, we're going to start off in the middle with our broad brush, and we're just going to start wiping this on here. Now, it is going to go like a yellowy colour when we first apply, and it's going to stay that way for, a good couple of hours. It won't go bone white straight up. So the first thing we want to do, like we did with our cleaning brush, we want to use our biggest, broadest one first, and just try and fill in the gaps in the middle, so the most surface area. And then we'll come in with our finer brushes later, and we'll get closer to the living bark. We don't want to try and get too much on that. This is where you want to try and use those skills that you learnt in kindergarten of staying in between the lines as much as you possibly can. It just looks so much neater when you haven't got the lime sulphur spread out all over your bark and everything. If you can just keep it to the deadwood itself, then it's going to look so much nicer. So there will be some little areas where you can't quite get the thicker brush in there. That's okay. As I said, we're just doing this area first. So what I'll pretty much do is I'll do this bottom section for you using the different brushes, and then I'll move up the tree and do the rest, because you're probably not going to want to sit here and watch me do the whole entire tree. So I'm pretty much getting to the point where with this thick brush here, I've covered this main area in the middle as much as I can. Now I need to swap over brushes. And I'm going to go to my medium-sized brush now. And I'm just going to try and get a little bit further down into these cracks and that down here. And I'll save the edges for my very fine brush. But this one I'm just trying to get down into these parts that I couldn't get with the thicker brush. And I always do prefer the brushes with the pointed ends too. It just makes it so much easier to get down into these big deep grooves. And you do want to apply enough that it's going to soak in. You may even need to do a second coat later on, but you don't want to apply so much straight up that the lime sulphur actually starts running down the tree and running down your bark and into your soil and all that kind of stuff. You want to try and avoid that as best as possible. So if you're starting to paint this on and it starts building up and starts running, then maybe just let it soak in for a little bit, just so you can avoid it running into the places where you actually don't want it. Alright, now we're going to change over to our smallest brush here. And I may have to obstruct the camera a little bit here. I'm going to do my best not to, but I do really want to be pretty fine with this. And you can see how I'm applying it, but I'm trying to avoid that living bark. Not that the lime sulphur is really going to do anything to the bark, but as I said, it's more just an issue of it looks nicer if you stay between the lines and you don't have the overspill of that white going onto your bark. you get those more sharper and more crisp lines if it's just on the deadwood itself. We actually do apply lime sulphur to the bark of the tree to overwinter the trees, but when we do that, we have it mixed at a ratio of 20 ml per 1 litre of water, so it's actually diluted. Now sometimes you still can get a little bit of white happening on your bark, but at that kind of dilution, you'll find that it tends to wash off fairly quickly at that rate. Whereas if you were to put it straight on like we're doing now, it would be much harder for it to come off. Try and get some of these little areas too that I couldn't get with the other brushes. And you can see where having the different size brushes comes in handy, because while this one can get most areas, if I had to do the whole tree with this brush, I'd be here for a long time because it's so small. So it's good to be able to get those bulk amounts done with the bigger brushes first, and then come in and do your fine detail work later. And make sure that if you plan on reusing your brushes, that you wash them off really well after you finish doing this, because lime sulphur does dry very hard, and it's very crusty as well. So just keep that in mind, that if you don't clean your brushes, then likely you won't be able to use them again. They won't work as well because the bristles will become very stiff. And I am trying to get as deep down into those grooves as possible, because lime sulphur will add a little bit of protection against rotting and things like that. So if we do get, some of that leaf litter and stuff stuck down in these grooves, hopefully this will offer a little bit of protection for that. Alright, so there you have it. That's the techniques that we use to maintain our deadwood. Now you can see at the moment it's got a bit of a yellow appearance to it. As I mentioned, it will stay like that for a couple of hours now, but stick around, because what I will do is I'll get some shots of it once it has dried up and it's gone to its white colour, and I'll just show you the results of what our cleaning is. And you can have a look at the start of the video compared to the end of the video, and just see how well the deadwood cleaned up and how that maintenance worked. So stick around for those shots that are coming up now. But if you want to learn more about bonsai and how to create trees like this, definitely do go over and check out our online bonsai courses at thebonsaidojo.com. I'll stick some links down in the description below. And if you want any of the tools that you've seen in today's videos, or any other tools that you might need for bonsai, check out the links down below. We'll put the link to our shop down there below, which is www.bonsai-en.shop. So definitely go and check that out. We do ship worldwide. But until next time, enjoy your bonsai journey.